Jacob Miller had always believed that life on the ranch taught a man patience. Each day was a test of endurance, not just against the heat of the sun or the rugged terrain, but against the quiet loneliness that stretched across the wide-open plains of Arizona. He had grown up on this land, learned to read its whispers in the wind, the soft tremble of the grass, and the distant calls of hawks circling high above. Over the years, the ranch had become more than just a piece of land. It was a rhythm, a way of life, and a companion that never asked for words in return. That afternoon, the sun hung low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red. Jacob had been checking the western fence line, inspecting the posts and repairing a broken wire. His hands were rough, scarred from years of labor, yet skilled enough to handle the delicate tasks with care. As he worked, he noticed something unusual, footprints leading toward the small rise near the creek. At first, he thought they might be from a wandering cow or even a coyote, but as he stepped closer, the prints revealed something different. They were human, fresh, and small. They hesitated, almost as if the person had been trying to move quietly, avoiding detection. Jacob's curiosity was immediate but cautious. In all his years on the ranch, people rarely wandered this far, especially women alone. The terrain was unforgiving, and the isolation could be dangerous. He followed the trail carefully, his boots making soft impressions in the dirt, every sense alert. The wind carried faint sounds, the rustle of dry leaves and the distant chatter of birds settling in for the evening. Then he saw her. She was crouched behind a large rock, her small frame hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. Her dress was dusty and torn, the fabric fraying at the edges from travel over the rough terrain. Her hair, once likely neat and well kept, was tangled and matted from exposure to the elements. But it was her eyes that caught Jacob's attention. They were wide, dark, and filled with a fear that seemed far too deep for someone so young. "Please, don't look at me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Jacob froze, a shiver running through him. He was a man who had faced storms, wild animals, and the occasional bandit, but the intensity of her fear made him pause. There was something about her plea that was not just about being seen. It carried a weight of desperation, a warning. He did not move closer immediately, unsure of how to respond. Years of living in solitude had taught him to read people carefully, and he could sense that any sudden movement might frighten her further. He took a slow, cautious step, keeping his hands visible and his voice low. "It's all right," he said gently, though he knew she might not hear him or trust the words. His eyes scanned the surroundings. There were no signs of immediate danger, no tracks of horses or other people, but the fear in her eyes suggested she had been running from something, or someone. She flinched slightly at his voice but did not flee. Instead, she pressed herself closer to the rock as though its rough surface offered some kind of protection. Jacob noticed the rope marks on her wrist, faint but visible in the fading sunlight. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably and her body seemed to tremble from both exhaustion and fear. She had traveled far, alone, through unforgiving terrain, and something in her history had left deep, invisible scars. Jacob felt a mixture of concern and curiosity. He had always been a man of action, preferring to solve problems practically rather than speculate, but with her, he realized words alone might not suffice. He decided to wait, to give her space, letting her decide when she would speak or move. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft rustling of the grass and the distant caw of a crow. Minutes passed. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the plains. The warmth of the day began to fade into a cool evening breeze which carried the scent of dry earth and distant pine. Jacob remained still, his gaze careful and respectful. He understood that trust had to be earned, especially with someone who clearly had reason to fear human contact. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling. I can't. They will find me." Her words were fragmented like pieces of a story that could not yet be fully told. Jacob did not push her for answers. Instead, he nodded slightly, silently acknowledging her fear without judgment. He could feel the weight of her history pressing down, even without knowing the details. Jacob's mind raced as he considered his options. The woman could be in danger, yet he had no way of knowing the full extent. The nearest town was miles away, and asking for help could bring unwanted attention. He had to rely on his instincts, honed over years of solitary life. He thought of the many times he had helped travelers or neighbors in need, always careful but always willing to extend a hand. And now, faced with this trembling figure, he knew he had to act with both caution and compassion. He stepped closer again, this time speaking softly. "You can trust me. I won't hurt you." The words seemed to reach her, for she lifted her eyes slightly, glancing at him with a mixture of fear and hope. Jacob could see that she had been through much, and yet there was a spark of resilience hidden beneath her anxiety. She was exhausted, but not broken. Jacob extended his hand slowly, not in command, but as an offer of safety. She did not take it immediately. Instead, she studied him, as though trying to read his intentions. Her gaze flicked to the horizon, then back to him. Finally, she nodded slightly, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It was a tentative acceptance, a silent agreement to let him help. He led her a few steps toward a shaded area near the creek, far enough from the open plain to offer some sense of security. The woman stayed close to him, still wary, but her body relaxed slightly as she realized he posed no immediate threat. Jacob offered her a canteen of water, which she accepted with shaking hands. She drank quickly, as though the water itself offered some measure of comfort and hope. Jacob watched her carefully, noticing the small details, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, and the way her voice quivered when she spoke. He understood that helping her would require patience and respect, not force or pressure. He knew that trust, once broken or damaged, could not be hurried. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned shades of deep purple and gold. Jacob knew that night would be cold, and the woman needed shelter. He gestured toward the ranch, a small complex of buildings in the distance. "You can come with me. You'll be safe there for the night," he said. She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. Jacob felt a quiet relief. The first step had been taken. The hardest part often was simply making contact, letting someone know they were not alone. As they walked slowly toward the ranch, Jacob could not help but think about the story she carried, hidden beneath her fear and silence. He sensed that the journey ahead would reveal more than just her immediate troubles. It would reveal strength, courage, and perhaps a way for both of them to find connection in a world that often demanded solitude. By the time they reached the small house on the ranch, the stars were beginning to appear, twinkling softly in the vast expanse above. Jacob opened the door and gestured for her to enter first, allowing her to choose how she would take this new step. She stepped inside, her movements careful but deliberate. For the first time that day, there was a sense of calm. Jacob watched her settle near the hearth, a small fire crackling and warming the room. He knew the night would be long, filled with questions unasked and stories untold. But he also knew that the first moment of trust had been established. The woman who had begged him not to look at her had been seen, not with judgment but with understanding. And in that recognition, something quiet but profound had begun. As Jacob sat across from her, he felt the weight of the day settle around him. The land, the ranch, and the vast plains had always been his companions, but tonight, another presence shared that space, fragile yet determined. He realized that sometimes the most extraordinary moments in life came not from grand adventures, but from the quiet act of seeing someone who had felt invisible and choosing to help them find safety in a world that could be unforgiving. The stars shone brightly outside, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob felt a sense of anticipation. The woman's story was only beginning, and though the path ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for certain. The evening had changed him, as much as it had changed her. The night on the ranch was quiet, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind outside. Jacob Miller sat near the hearth, watching the young woman as she cautiously explored the small cabin. She kept her movements slow, almost as if she were measuring the safety of each step. Her eyes, once filled with raw fear, now showed the faintest glimmer of curiosity. Jacob stayed silent, giving her the space she needed. Words, he knew, could only come when she was ready. Eventually, she settled on a worn chair near the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jacob handed her a warm blanket, which she accepted reluctantly, draping it around her shoulders. The firelight danced across her face, revealing the delicate features of someone who had endured far more than her years should allow. For a moment, neither of them spoke, allowing the quiet to stretch, comforting and safe. After some time, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Amelia," she said. Jacob nodded gently, acknowledging her introduction without pressing for more. Names were important, he knew, but trust had to grow before details could be shared. Jacob offered her water and a small portion of bread he had kept for supper. She took them slowly, appreciating the simple kindness. The act of eating, small though it was, seemed to settle some of her nerves. She ate quietly, her eyes occasionally glancing toward Jacob, measuring him, testing whether he could truly be trusted. As the night deepened, Amelia began to share fragments of her story, in her own cautious way. She spoke of her journey through the wilderness, traveling alone to escape a past that had been unkind. Her voice wavered, and at times she paused, as though the words themselves carried weight too heavy to bear. Jacob listened quietly, offering no interruptions, only the silent presence of someone who could provide safety and patience. Jacob learned that Amelia had come from a nearby town, where life had grown difficult and unsafe for her. She had fled under the cover of night, carrying only what she could, and had walked for days through rugged hills and dry plains. The journey had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but it had also brought her to this small sanctuary, the ranch where Jacob had lived for many years in quiet solitude. As the fire burned low, Jacob suggested that Amelia rest for the night. She hesitated, her fear of vulnerability still strong, but finally nodded. He led her to a small guest room in the back of the cabin, a simple space with a clean bed and a window that overlooked the plains. The room smelled faintly of pine and the earth outside, a comforting scent that seemed to ease her mind. Jacob stayed near the doorway for a few moments, watching her settle in. He did not leave immediately, understanding that the night could be long and filled with troubling memories. Amelia seemed to relax slightly, the first signs of trust showing in the way she adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. Jacob quietly left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The next morning, the ranch was alive with the soft sounds of animals stirring and the wind moving through the tall grasses. Jacob had already begun his morning routine, tending to the cattle and preparing breakfast. Amelia remained in the cabin, watching him from the window, still cautious but beginning to observe the rhythm of ranch life. She had never experienced such wide-open spaces, the freedom of the plains, or the steady routine that brought a sense of order to the vast wilderness. Eventually, Jacob called to her gently, inviting her to join him outside. She stepped into the morning sunlight, blinking against the brightness, her eyes taking in the vast landscape. Jacob showed her how to feed the chickens and collect fresh eggs, demonstrating each task patiently. Amelia followed his instructions carefully, her hands learning the small, precise movements needed for each chore. With each task completed, her confidence grew, and the fear that had clung to her began to loosen its grip. As the days passed, Amelia adapted to life on the ranch. She learned to care for the animals, mend fences, and help with the daily work that kept the ranch running. Jacob continued to offer guidance, never demanding more than she was ready to give, always careful to respect her boundaries. Their relationship grew quietly, built on mutual respect and the understanding that trust could not be rushed. One afternoon, while tending to the cattle near the far edge of the property, Jacob noticed movement in the distance. A group of men was approaching, riding fast and with purpose. Jacob's heart tightened. He recognized the signs of trouble from years of experience. The men were looking for Amelia, he realized, likely sent from the town she had fled. Jacob acted quickly but calmly. He signaled Amelia to follow him to a hidden area behind a cluster of rocks, where she could remain unseen. He stood in plain view, ready to confront the men if necessary. His mind raced, thinking of ways to protect her without escalating the situation. The men arrived, dismounting from their horses with a mixture of confidence and aggression. Jacob spoke to them firmly but respectfully, explaining that Amelia was under his care and that she had found refuge on the ranch. The men questioned him, their voices harsh, but Jacob remained steady. He knew that any sign of fear or hesitation could embolden them, so he stood tall, his calm presence a shield for Amelia. Amelia watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding. She realized that she was no longer entirely alone. She had someone who would stand by her, someone willing to protect her without forcing her into fear. The confrontation was tense, but Jacob's unwavering stance and quiet authority convinced the men that they could not take her without creating a scene that would reflect poorly on them. Frustrated, they left, muttering threats that were empty in the face of Jacob's calm courage. After the men had gone, Amelia emerged from her hiding place, relief flooding her features. Jacob offered her a reassuring smile. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe here." For the first time in many days, she allowed herself to breathe freely, her shoulders relaxing as the tension drained from her body. Life on the ranch gradually returned to its quiet rhythm. Amelia continued her work with the animals, tending to the land and learning from Jacob. She began to speak more freely, sharing memories, hopes, and fears that she had kept hidden for so long. Jacob listened with patience and understanding, never rushing her, never judging her past. He recognized that healing took time, and that trust, once earned, was a fragile but powerful bond. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob watched Amelia help gather the animals for the night. She moved with a quiet confidence now, her fear replaced with determination. Jacob felt a sense of pride, not in himself, but in her courage to face each day despite the hardships she had endured. He realized that sometimes the most extraordinary bravery was not in heroic acts, but in the quiet persistence of a person reclaiming their life. Over the weeks, their bond deepened. Jacob and Amelia shared stories, laughter, and moments of silence that spoke more than words ever could. The ranch became more than just a place of refuge. It became a space of growth, learning, and trust. Amelia learned to navigate not only the challenges of the land, but also the complexities of human relationships, discovering that safety, respect, and patience could be as powerful as courage. Jacob reflected often on the first moment he had seen her trembling behind the rock, begging him not to look. He realized that moment had been transformative, not just for her, but for him as well. He had witnessed vulnerability, fear, and resilience all at once, and in doing so, he had discovered a deeper understanding of compassion and humanity. Amelia's presence changed the rhythm of the ranch. She brought a new energy, a sense of hope, and a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, life could flourish when met with kindness and patience. Jacob understood that the encounter had been more than chance. It was a meeting that would shape both their lives, a story of survival, trust, and the quiet strength found in human connection. As the stars emerged, twinkling over the vast plains, Jacob and Amelia stood together watching the horizon. The night was calm, filled with possibilities and the promise of a future unburdened by fear. Amelia's journey was far from over, but she now faced it with a newfound courage, supported by someone who had seen her not as a victim, but as a person worthy of care, respect, and safety. Jacob knew that life would continue with its challenges, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever came. The ranch had always been a place of work and solitude, but now it had become a place of trust, resilience, and hope. A sanctuary where fear no longer held power over the human spirit. And so, under the wide-open sky, with the plains stretching endlessly around them, Jacob and Amelia stood quietly, knowing that the past had shaped them, the present had given them safety, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to face together. The ranch, the land, and the quiet strength of two people connecting in a vast, untamed world had created a story that would live on, a testament to courage, trust, and the enduring power of human compassion.